Hi there, it's Nicole here today with some full stamped background panels featuring masking. I created the snowman panel using the Mama Elephant So Many Snowmen stamp, and I didn't include it in the video that I did here about a week or so ago. And I did the card at a retreat. I didn't have a video camera or anything when I did it. So I've recreated one here, and I've created a similar design with the cat's Meow stamp set, which actually came out first. It's this fantastic borders. So here's the original stamps or card I was talking about with the So Many Snowmen. I've got a couple of panels. I'm going to use some Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I'm going to go ahead and recreate the snowman card first. What's fantastic about this is if you're going to do it in portrait, which is what I'm doing here, it's going to overhang. So it gives you a little bit more room to play so the rows aren't exactly the same. And I'll show you what I mean. So I am stamping this on Bristol Smooth cardstock. I'm going to use Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers to color instead of another coloring medium. So this is my preferred paper for Zig coloring. The VersaFine ink is going to stamp beautifully. Before I move my paper or stamp, I'm going to go ahead and just stamp this again. I've not even re-inked it. It's going to be pretty light, but I've stamped this on some masking paper. And this is Simon Says Stamp masking paper. I absolutely love it because it's sticky, but it's not so sticky that it's going to tear your paper, and the masks stay put beautifully. Along just the top edge, I am going to cut out or cut around the snowmen. What makes these background panels so successful is the appearance that it's a seamless design. And you could definitely do something similar, going more of a landscape style of card. The rows are just going to be very stacked one on top of another. It would still look amazing. You could do that if you wanted to. I just wanted to show, for one, how I created the original card, and how if you create it like this, since this is a lot wider stamp, if you're stamping it on a thinner background, you can move it side to side and kind of mix it up a little bit more. I don't take a ton of time cutting out my masks. I kind of cut around them really quick. I try to cut right on the black line. I want to go ahead and clean my stamp really well. For this, I find it easier to move the stamp. I am using a stamp positioner. I'm using the MISTI to stamp this, in case I would have to stamp the image more than once. Let's say I'm stamping with Copic markers, so I'm using a Copic friendly ink. A lot of times those inks need to be stamped more than once to get a really nice solid black outline, or at least I have to. It might be my ink pads, but I like to use the MISTI so that I am not constantly trying to line something up or having to redo it a lot. So I've moved my paper just a little bit, and now I'm going to position my stamp where it's hanging off on the right side a lot. I really did try to center my snowmen as good as I could. I didn't want to cut through too many of their faces. Sometimes it's inevitable, but I tried to not do that if possible. Now, if I had cut an entire mask the first time of the entire image, I simply could have moved my mask up. So there's two ways to do this. You can create multiple masks. In fact, I like to save these. These were still very usable after this. I simply stuck them to the back of my clear packaging and saved them that way, so that if I ever want to stamp this again, I already have masks. Or you could stamp the entire border and move the border up each time. And I'm going to show you that with the next card using the cat's Meow. Now there's just a tiny little bit at the top, but it looks so much better if you go ahead and fill that in. What you end up getting when you remove your masks is it looks like a sheet of paper or pattern paper that you have simply trimmed down to work as a card. So there is my So Many Snowmen background. And here's that backing paper for the stamp set. And I am just going to lay my masks right on that. They peel off. I have reused them since then, so they do still work. For the cat's meow, I'm going to do the same thing. I like to start at the bottom and work my way up. So I want to position this where I don't cut through too many of the cat's faces if possible. This stamp is a little bit narrower, so you may have to stamp it more times. You would not have to stamp it all the way to the top if you didn't want to. I went ahead and created full backgrounds for both. I'm stamping the bottom layer just like I did for the snowmen, and this time I want to make sure I use a piece of masking paper that is wide enough for the entire border. That way I can cut this all out following that top cut line there, and I can simply move the mask up with each layer that I stamp to build this full background. So instead of 2 masks, I only have 1. Makes it a lot easier, and you can reuse this mask over and over. When you are cutting out, I like to move the paper rather than the scissors. You're going to get a much nicer line. You can see I'm just kind of moving my paper around with my scissors there. I like to cut right on the black outline, and that's going to give you a really nice mask. Just a couple more here. For the next layer, now that I have my mask in place, I'm going to shift my paper over to the right and shift my stamp over to the left. This is going to give me a few different images on top of that first layer or that first border of cats, so that it isn't the exact same thing over and over. It wouldn't hurt anything if it was. In fact, if you were doing a landscape style, just as I mentioned with the snowman card, it is going to be very, very much the same repetition over and over. This just gives you options to mix it up a little bit. So this time I'm going to shift my paper to the left and my stamp to the right. I've moved my mask up. I like to use the MISTI. It just provides that security that if I don't get it stamped perfectly the first time, I can go back and stamp it again. Now there's a little thin border up at the top. You could leave that if you wanted to. Just like with the snowman card, I want this to look more like a piece of pattern paper that's been trimmed down rather than a design I've stamped. And I'm going to go ahead and mask one more time and stamp the cats again. Now I've used this mask over and over already. I had kind of a difficult day coloring. Both backgrounds, original backgrounds I stamped here, I didn't like my first attempts at coloring, so I had to re-stamp both backgrounds. I already had the masks. It made it so much easier to just go ahead and stamp these again. It hardly took any time at all. Here are both backgrounds side by side. Aren't those fun? The first card I'm going to show the coloring for is the cat's Meow. I have sped through the coloring pretty quickly. This video is more on the creation of the background with masking rather than the coloring, but I still wanted to leave it in here. Because I used Bristol Smooth Cardstock, which I love for Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers, I am going to do some fast watercoloring where I lay down maybe 1-2 colors and then blend it out with a water brush pen. I've got water in this water brush pen. I'm trying to be careful and not have too much water in my pen so that it pools up too much, but it still gives a nice soft watercolored look. The color combinations shown here are pretty much what I use throughout this background. I will go ahead and just color most of this off screen to save a little bit of time. It is repetition over and over. The only difference is I did color a few cats with some black spots to mix it up a little bit. Here's what the background looks like. I'm just adding some pink to the insides of the ears and to some of the noses. And then the cats, quite a few of them are holding something, whether it be hearts or they have little bow ties or crowns on top of their head, or they're holding coffee cups, whatever it might be. For that, I'm going to use some wine red and pretty much color everything in with those same colors. This is also a good time if I have missed anything, maybe the mustaches on a couple of the cats or the spots on cats, or the stripes rather on the cats. I can fill those in at this time. And I'm coloring all those little accents in with red. You could do any color you wanted to. In fact, I think it would be fun to see the cats colored in some maybe rainbow colors instead of the more traditional, quote unquote, traditional colors. I'll switch over and color in the snowmen now. The snowmen is what inspired this whole video, of course. The inspiration card was colored with Copic markers. This time I wanted to do a little bit quicker coloring, and so I am using the zigs and using a water brush pen just like I did for the cats and blending out that color. So I've laid down some shadow mauve on the snowmen themselves and blended out with the water brush pen. I'm kind of working from top to bottom here. This also really helps so that you don't miss anything. I want the areas that I've already watercolored to kind of be dry before I go back and color whatever image is next to that so that it doesn't maybe bleed. The reds have a tendency to bleed. There is no embossing here to hold that color in the line. So I'm trying to be a little bit careful as far as hoping that the paper has dried or the snowmen have dried before I start coloring in their accessories. Then working from top to bottom, I am coloring in the accessories, the hats, the scarves, the stocking caps, the pipes, the noses, all of those things, working my way down the card. And I did go ahead and add little pink cheeks to several rows of the snowmen. I will come back and fill that in, or fill them in as I work down the card. Working from the top to the bottom really helps ensure that you don't miss little areas. I know for the cat card, I skipped around a lot when watercoloring those cats, and I had to take a step back and come back, and I noticed a few areas I missed. So it can be really easy to do. I'm going to continue to color all of these in. I kept my color palette very traditional here. Lots of reds, greens, blacks for the top hats, black for the pipes, but everything else is basically red and green with the exception of the little birds that are blue. The broom here has got some brown. Any color combination that you want to use is absolutely fine. I wanted this to be very Christmassy themed, and I'm going to use a Christmas sentiment for this, so I kept my color palette pretty simple. What I love about this is when I get to the greeting portion, I want the greeting to really pop from the background, but not take away from the design. So it's going to be super, super simple. Before I add anything to the backgrounds, I'm going to go over all of the eyes with a black glaze pen and then go back with a white pen and add highlights, add stripe patterns or plaid patterns or polka dots to scarves and hats and things like that. It adds so much to the design, I think, to add those little fun touches to these images. And what I was talking about with the super simple greeting, the backgrounds of these cards are the stars of the show, yet you still want a greeting that's easy to read, very legible, and still gives you that sentiment. So I am going to be stamping little sentiment strips on black cardstock, embossing them in white, cutting them into thin strips, and popping them up with foam adhesive on the background. I struggled with the inspiration card for this very reason. After I did all that work coloring, I had a hard time covering up the snowmen. And when I came up with the little strips over the top, and told myself, think of this like pattern paper, not like an image I've colored, it was a lot easier to go ahead and cover up parts of the card with these little strips. I went ahead and stamped these greetings from the Simon Says Stamp and Arctic Christmas stamp set. I stamped them all at once using the MISTI with Versamark ink, heat embossed with white embossing powder, and then I am simply trimming these into super thin strips that I can cut down a little bit here and pop up with thin foam adhesive strips right in the center of my card. And even though this is a more holiday themed stamp set, it has a holiday image and lots of greetings, and I'm obviously using Christmas greetings for the snowman card, I'm using the I love you sentiment and from all of us greeting from this stamp set on my cat card, which isn't a Christmas themed card. I love to be able to use stamp sets in multiple ways for things that maybe they aren't even geared for or weren't originally intended for. So instead of having to go and grab multiple greeting stamp sets to work for this card, I was able to simply use one, and it works for both a holiday card and a non-holiday card. I'm adhering these backgrounds to top fold card bases. I did set the cat card aside since I have to stamp additional I love you sentiments and from all of us sentiment. And I will show here adding some foam adhesive to the back of these strips and adding them right to the center of my background. Popping them up with a little foam adhesive helps with making them very legible and very easy to read, yet still keeping the star of the card, these amazing full panel backgrounds. And I think that top little greeting there is just a little long, so I'm going to snip that down. And I like to adhere them a little bit at an angle, gives a little bit of interest to the design. So here are those additional I love you greetings for the cat card. I will adhere those and from all of us, and my full stamped background cards are all finished. Thanks for joining me today for these cards featuring Mama Elephant stamps. The supplies I used to create these cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Mama Elephant that you might be interested in. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.